Hey Queens, this is Ali. I hope you enjoyed the story. Thank you.
You're our father, and we have proof.
The chandeliers of the Signal Seoul ballroom threw diamonds of light across 300 guests in silk and tailored wool, and none of them noticed the four small shapes weaving between the legs of security guards until it was far too late. Finn went in low, sliding under a velvet rope like he'd rehearsed it 100 times, which he had in the hallway of their Newark apartment on a Tuesday night while their mother slept through a fever. Liam followed with a folder clutched to his chest, the corners already soft from being opened and closed so many times. Cora walked in like she owned the marble floor, chin up, refusing to run because running drew eyes and she wanted the eyes to come later on her terms. Maya came last, gripping the hem of her dress, breathing too fast, but she came. A string quartet stuttered into silence. A photographer lowered his camera without meaning to. And at the front of the room, beneath an arch dripping with white orchids, a man in a charcoal suit turned from the woman beside him. A woman in ivory, smiling the practiced smile of someone who has never once had that smile questioned, and found four pairs of eyes staring up at him that were unmistakably, unbearably his own. "Are you Do Hyunwoo?" Liam asked, and his voice cracked in the middle of the question, which made it worse, not better. The man didn't answer. He couldn't. His hand had found the edge of the arch behind him like he needed something solid to hold on to. Cora stepped forward and set the folder down on the white tablecloth, right beside the wedding cake, 4 tiers of vanilla and gold leaf that nobody would eat that night. "We have proof," she said. Somewhere near the back, a woman in ivory went very still. "Now hold on to that. Because before any of this happened, before 4 9-year-olds ever set foot on a plane, there was a woman coughing into a dish towel at 2 in the morning so her children wouldn't hear her. And there was a photograph hidden inside a hollowed-out book, and there was a lie that had lasted almost a decade. Welcome back to the channel, family. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now because where we're going, you don't want to miss a single turn. This one's going to hurt in the best way. Let's get into it. Solene Marsh had a laugh that used to fill up a room. Her downstairs neighbor in Newark still talked about it, how you could hear it through the floorboards on a Friday night, back when Solene worked doubles at the hospital and still had energy left to dance in her kitchen with 4 toddlers hanging off her legs. That was 6 years ago. The laugh was quieter now. Some weeks it disappeared altogether. She worked as a home health aide, the kind of job that ate a person's back and knees and gave very little back in return, and she had done it without complaint for the better part of a decade, because complaining cost time she didn't have and energy she needed for 4 children who each seemed to require a different kind of mothering entirely. Finn wanted facts. He collected them like other kids collected cards. The boiling point of nitrogen, the distance to the nearest star, the exact reason bridges didn't fall down. He rarely looked people in the eye when he spoke to them, but he never forgot a single thing anyone told him, which made him either the best or the worst person to lie to. Liam collected people instead. He knew the names of every kid on their block, every bus driver's favorite football team, every cashier's birthday. He'd talk to a brick wall if it let him, and somehow the wall would end up liking him. Cora didn't talk much. When she did, people tended to stop what they were doing and listen because whatever came out of her mouth had usually been thought through twice before anyone else in the room had thought it through once. And Maya felt things first and biggest, the way some people catch a cold before anyone else in the house even sneezes. She cried at commercials. She cried when Cora got scolded, even if Cora hadn't cried herself. She was the reason the 4 of them, despite their differences, moved through the world like a single organism with 4 hearts and 1 shared nervous system. They had never met their father. For years, whenever they'd asked, Solene gave the same 3 sentences and no more. He lived far away, he didn't know about them, and it was complicated. The word complicated did a lot of heavy lifting in that house. Then in March, Solene collapsed in the hallway outside the bathroom. It wasn't dramatic, not the way collapses look in movies. She simply folded, quietly, the way a tired building settles into its foundation, and Cora found her 20 minutes later because Cora had gone looking when the toilet never flushed and no footsteps ever crossed the hall. The diagnosis came 3 weeks after that. spoken in a doctor's office with too bright lighting and a box of tissues nobody touched. A blood disorder, rare, expensive to treat, the kind of illness that required a specialist and money the family did not have and time that felt like it was already running out. "We're going to be fine," Solene told them that night, sitting on the edge of Maya's bed with all 4 children piled around her like she was the last warm thing in a cold house. "I've handled worse." Cora watched her mother's hands while she said it. They were shaking. That was the night the 4 of them stopped believing the 3-sentence answer. It was Finn who found the photograph first, tucked inside the false bottom of an old jewelry box in the back of their mother's closet. A young Solene laughing that big lost laugh, standing next to a Korean man with sharp cheekbones and a smile he clearly wasn't used to giving away for free. On the back, in their mother's handwriting, a single word: Seoul. It was Liam who talked their elderly downstairs neighbor into remembering things she swore she'd forgotten, over lemonade and too many cookies, until she let slip that Solene used to work for a hospitality company owned by some big Korean conglomerate years back before the twins. No, she corrected herself, quadruplets were born. It was Cora who spent 41 nights combing through public records and old business directories on the library computer after school, cross-referencing names, until one name kept surfacing again and again in connection with the company, in connection with Seoul, in connection with a face that matched a hidden photograph. Do Hyun-woo, chairman of Do-One Group, 34 years old. Unmarried, according to every article, until 3 weeks ago, a single new headline: Do-One chairman to wed longtime friend attorney Yoon Jia in Seoul ceremony this fall. And it was Maya, quiet, watchful Maya, who noticed the date circled on their mother's calendar that same week, the one where Solene had written nothing, just drawn a small broken heart, faint enough that she probably thought no one would ever see it. They brought everything to the one adult who had never once looked at them like they were too much to handle, Odette, who had known their mother since nursing school, who picked them up from the airport of Solene's exhaustion more times than anyone would admit, who kept a spare key, a spare bed, and an endless supply of patience. "You want to do what?" Odette said, not a question, when Cora laid it all out on her kitchen table. "We're not asking you to help us lie," Liam said, which was, strictly speaking, exactly what they were asking. "We're asking you to come with us," Cora corrected. "So it isn't a lie. It's a school trip. You're the chaperone." Odette looked at 4 faces that had clearly not slept properly in days, and then at a photograph of a man she now recognized, and then at the framed picture on her own refrigerator of Solene from nursing school, before the doubles, before the exhaustion, before the silence that had crept into her friend's home like mold behind a wall. "If this goes wrong," Odette said quietly, "your mother will never forgive either of us." "If we don't try," Cora answered, "she might not have time left to forgive anybody." Nobody said anything for a long moment. Then Odette reached for her phone and started looking up flights to Incheon. They told Solene it was a school trip to Jeju, a science and culture program, forms signed, permission slips forged with a careful hand that Finn had practiced for 3 nights straight until his signature of their mother's name looked close enough not to raise questions from a woman too sick and too tired to look twice. Solene kissed each of them goodbye at the door, told them to behave, told them she loved them more than anything on this earth, and had no idea that her children were not flying toward a volcanic island for a school trip. They were flying straight into the center of the very thing she had spent 9 years running from. And somewhere in Seoul, a woman named Yoon Jia was already making sure the engagement stayed exactly as planned, because she had worked far too hard and waited far too long to let anyone ruin it now. That's where we'll leave it for now. If you're watching this from somewhere new to me, drop your city in the comments. I love seeing where this story is traveling to. And if you're the kind of person who needs to know how it all ends without waiting on the next upload, well, there might be a way to get the whole story sooner than you think. I'll leave that one for you to think about. Batch 2 is coming. Seoul is waiting. And Do Hyun-woo has no idea his entire life is about to be rewritten by 4 9-year-olds and a folder of proof he never asked for. Incheon Airport swallowed them whole the moment they stepped off the jet bridge. A wall of announcements in a language none of them spoke fluently, a river of travelers moving with a purpose the children didn't share, and Odette gripping Maya's hand so tightly her knuckles went pale. "Stay close," Odette said for the 9th time in 20 minutes. "We know," Cora said for the 9th time in 20 minutes, though her eyes were already scanning the arrivals hall the way she'd learned to scan a library database. Methodically, patiently, looking for the one detail that mattered among 1,000 that didn't. Finn had memorized the Do One Group headquarters address from 3 different sources, just in case one was wrong. Liam had already made friends with the woman at the currency exchange counter, who slipped him a piece of candy and told him, unprompted, that the Do One chairman's engagement party was the talk of the city, biggest wedding since some actress married a baseball player, whoever that was. Maya said nothing. She was watching a departures board flicker through cities she'd never see, thinking about her mother's hands shaking on the edge of her bed, and how far away Newark suddenly felt. Odette had found the party through nothing more than persistence and a Korean English dictionary app. Do One Group's headquarters posted the engagement gala's venue and date on their corporate press page, tucked between quarterly earnings and a charity gala announcement, because powerful men rarely think to hide their happiness from strangers. It never occurred to Do Hyun-woo that the strangers who mattered most were flying in from New Jersey with a folder held together by a rubber band. They checked into a small guest house 2 subway stops from Gangnam, 4 children and 1 exhausted adult crammed into 2 rooms that smelled like lavender detergent, and for one night, everyone slept like the trip really was about volcanic rock formations and traditional tea ceremonies. The next morning, Cora laid out the plan on a paper napkin like she was briefing a small army. "We can't just walk into Do One Tower," she said. "Security. We need another way in." "The wedding's not for 3 weeks," Liam pointed out. "We have time to find him somewhere else first." It was Finn, flipping through a stack of printed articles at the guest house's shared table, who found it, a small notice buried in a Korean lifestyle blog, translated clumsily by his phone. The Do One Group chairman's mother ran a charity foundation for children with chronic illness, and every month, without fail, she visited a pediatric ward in Gangnam-gu. No photographers allowed, no press invited. "That's her," Finn said. "That's our way in." "Our way into what?" Odette asked. "A hospital? You want to sneak into a hospital?" "Not sneak," Cora said, already reaching for her backpack. "Help. Grandma Do One volunteers with a wagon that hands out books and toys and stuff to the kids. Regular volunteers get badges. Anyone can sign up." "She's not your grandma," Odette said gently because someone needed to. Cora's jaw tightened. "Not yet." The woman they found 3 days later at Gangnam Sarung Children's Hospital did not look like the mother of one of Korea's wealthiest men. She looked like someone's favorite aunt, soft cardigan, sensible shoes, silver hair pulled back loosely, laughing at something a 6-year-old with a feeding tube had just told her about dinosaurs. Her name, according to the badge on her volunteer cart, was Han Mi-suk. Liam approached her the way he approached everyone, like they were already friends and simply hadn't been formally introduced yet. "Do you need help with the cart?" he asked in careful, rehearsed Korean, the phrase Cora had drilled into him on the subway ride over. Mi-suk blinked, surprised, then smiled the way people smile when a child does something unexpectedly kind. "You speak Korean?" "A little," Liam admitted, switching back to English. "My sister taught me 1 sentence." Mi-suk laughed, really laughed, a sound that filled the hallway, and waved all 4 of them over without a second thought because in her experience, children who wanted to help sick children were rarely children you needed to worry about. For 4 afternoons, the quadruplets became fixtures of Mi-suk's rounds. Finn explained the science behind a boy's 4 drips so precisely that a resident doctor stopped to listen. Liam had every nurse on the floor calling him by name within 2 days. Cora sat for hours with a girl recovering from surgery who hadn't spoken a word to anyone since she'd arrived, and by the 3rd afternoon, the girl was whispering back. Maya cried with a mother in the hallway whose son had just gotten difficult news, simply sat beside her and cried too without being asked, without needing to understand every word being said, and the woman held Maya's hand like she was the only person in the building who understood. Mi-suk watched all of this with an expression that kept shifting, small and unreadable, like she was doing arithmetic she didn't want to finish. "You 4, she said on the 4th afternoon as they packed up the cart together. "Where are your parents?" "Our mom's sick," Maya said before anyone could stop her. "Back home. That's kind of why we're here." Mi-suk's hands went still over a stack of picture books. "I'm sorry to hear that. Is there someone helping her?" We're trying to, Cora said carefully. That's part of why we came to Seoul. For a school trip, Misuk said gently, and something in her tone made it clear she'd stopped believing that story roughly 2 afternoons ago. Nobody answered. Nobody needed to. Misuk studied the four of them for a long moment. Finn's sharp, careful eyes, Liam's easy warmth, Cora's guarded composure, Maya's open heart. And something about the arrangement of those four things together tugged at a memory she hadn't let herself examine in almost a decade. A woman. A laugh that filled a room. A summer 9 years ago, before her son buried a grief he never spoke of and agreed, finally, to marry someone stable and known and safe. "What's your mother's name?" Misuk asked very quietly. Cora hesitated. Then, because something in this woman's face made lying feel suddenly impossible, she answered. Soline. The stack of picture books slipped from Misuk's hands and scattered across the linoleum floor. She didn't bend to pick them up right away. She stood very still, one hand pressed flat against her chest, staring at four children who were watching her with the particular stillness of kids who have just realized an adult knows something enormous and hasn't said it out loud yet. Soline Marsh, Misuk whispered, not really asking. You knew her? Liam breathed. Misuk knelt, slowly, gathering the books with hands that weren't quite steady, buying herself a few seconds she clearly needed. I knew a Soline, she said carefully. 9 years ago. My son, she stopped herself, started again. A woman who worked one summer for our company's hospitality division. Beautiful laugh. She left very suddenly. We were told she'd gone back to America for a family emergency and never returned any calls after that. She didn't leave, Cora said, and her voice, usually so measured, cracked around the edges. Someone made her leave. Someone's been lying to both sides for 9 years. Misuk's eyes moved slowly over each of their faces again, doing that same arithmetic, except this time she let herself finish the equation. 4 children. 9 years old. A black American mother named Soline who had vanished from Seoul 9 years and roughly 9 months before 4 children who each had the unmistakable curve of her son's jaw, the exact tilt of his eyes when he was thinking hard about something, and, in Cora's case devastatingly, his precise, unreadable stillness when she didn't want to give an emotion away for free. Oh, Misuk said softly, and one hand came up to cover her mouth. Oh my goodness. Please don't tell him yet, Cora said quickly, panic breaking through her composure for the first time since they'd landed. Not like this. Not before we know everything. Please. Misuk looked at this fierce, guarded little girl clutching a folder against her chest like it was the only solid thing in the world, and felt something in her own chest crack wide open. Grief for 9 lost years, fury at whoever had stolen them, and underneath both, a joy so enormous it frightened her. I won't say a word, she promised. Not until you're ready. But 3 days later, at a private family dinner Misuk had not been able to cancel without raising suspicion. Her son's fiancée looked up from her wine glass with a smile just a half-second too practiced and asked, apropos of nothing at all. Mother Duwon, I heard you made some new little friends at the hospital this week. Volunteers, was it? How lovely. Tell me, were any of them American? Misuk's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Because she had told no one. Which meant someone else already knew exactly who those children were, and exactly what they'd come to Seoul to prove. Misuk set her fork down with the careful precision of someone buying time she didn't have. Volunteers come and go every week, she said lightly. I couldn't tell you where any of them are from. Across the table, Yoonjia smiled the same smile she'd worn in every photograph for the last 3 years. Warm at the mouth, calculating at the eyes, a smile built by someone who had spent a very long time practicing how to look harmless. Of course, Jia said. I only ask because one of the nurses mentioned 4 children. Quadruplets, she said. That's rare enough to be memorable, don't you think? Hyun-woo, seated at the head of the table, looked up from his plate for the first time all evening. Quadruplets, he repeated mildly. That is unusual. Isn't it? Jia said, and her eyes didn't leave Misuk's face. Misuk had built a career, long before her son's success eclipsed her own, on reading rooms, investor rooms, boardrooms, rooms full of men who assumed a soft cardigan meant a soft mind. She read this one now, and what she read frightened her more than anything had in 9 years. Jia already knew. Not guessed. No. The question wasn't information gathering. It was a warning shot, dressed up as dinner conversation, aimed squarely at Mi-suk's ability to keep a secret she'd only been keeping for 3 days. You should meet them sometime, Mi-suk said carefully, testing the water. Delightful children. I'm sure, Jia said, and reached for her wine, and the conversation moved on to seating charts and flower arrangements, and nobody at that table except the 2 women understood that something enormous had just passed silently between them, like 2 pieces of artillery confirming the other's position before the real fight began. Jia excused herself before dessert, citing a headache, and sat in her car in the Do-won Estate's circular driveway for 11 minutes before she picked up her phone. They're here, she said when the call connected. Earlier than we thought. The voice on the other end was calm, unbothered. The voice of a man who had been paid well for 9 years to make problems disappear quietly. The mother? No. The children. Jia's fingers drummed against the steering wheel. Find out where they're staying. Find out who brought them. And find out how much they actually know. And if they know everything? Jia watched the lights of the main house glow warm and gold through the windshield. Watched a party being built one flower arrangement at a time for a wedding she had waited 9 years to be standing at the center of. Then we make sure nobody believes them, she said and hung up. Back at the guest house, the children had no idea a car was already circling their neighborhood. No idea that a man with a notepad and a very good memory for faces had begun asking quiet questions at the front desk about a guardian traveling with 4 American kids. They only knew that Mi-suk hadn't called in 2 days and Cora's patience, thin under the best circumstances, had worn down to something jagged. She's scared, Finn said, laying out the timeline on the guest house floor like a crime board, printed articles, hospital visitor badges, the photograph from their mother's jewelry box. Someone found out. That's the only explanation that fits. Then we go around her, Cora said. We stop waiting for the right moment. There is no right moment. We go straight to him. At his office? Odette said, alarmed, looking up from the phone call she'd been 3 minutes into with a very worried Solene, who thankfully believed the static was just bad reception from Jeju and not 4 children asleep 2 rooms away in downtown Seoul. Cora, you can't just walk into Do-won Tower. We can if we're already inside, Liam said slowly, and something in his voice made everyone look at him. The engagement gala. It's at the Signal. Grandma Do-won told me the guest list is huge, vendors, staff, half the building. Nobody checks every single face at something that size. You want to crash his engagement party? Odette said flatly. We want to stop a wedding that shouldn't happen, Cora corrected, before it becomes a marriage that can't be undone. There's a difference. Maya, curled in the corner with her knees pulled to her chest, spoke for the first time in an hour. What if he doesn't believe us? What if he just has security throw us out and it's over? Nobody had an answer for that because it was the only question that actually mattered, and all 4 of them knew it. It was Finn, methodical as ever, who solved it 2 nights later, hunched over the guest house's ancient desktop computer at 2 in the morning while everyone else slept. He'd been quietly building something for weeks without telling anyone. A folder, digital and physical both, cross-referencing birth records from a private clinic in Newark with old visa and travel documents he'd found in his mother's fireproof box, matched against Do-won Group's own archived staff records from 9 years back. Records that were sloppily public because no one at a hospitality division ever expects their old summer intern list to matter to anyone. The math was undeniable. Solene Marsh had left Seoul in late autumn. The Quadruplets were born the following July. And buried in an old expense report, 4 lines from the bottom, was a name Finn recognized instantly from every article he'd read about Jia's rise through Do-won's legal department. An authorization for a relocation and severance package for one Solene Marsh, dated the same week she vanished, signed off not by Human Resources, but personally by Yoon Jia. She paid our mom to leave, Finn whispered to the empty room, staring at the screen, his hands cold. She's the reason. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was her. He printed everything twice and hid 1 copy inside his shoe. The morning of the gala, Odette tried one final time to talk them out of it, standing in the guesthouse doorway with her coat still on. "If we're caught, they could have us deported. Do you understand that? This isn't a game." "We know," Cora said, and for the first time since they'd landed in Seoul, her voice wasn't steady at all. "But Mom is running out of time, and time is the one thing we can't lie our way into getting more of." Odette looked at 4 children dressed in the nicest clothes they owned, borrowed shoes, hair brushed with shaking hands, carrying a folder held together with a rubber band that was about to detonate a stranger's entire engineered life, and she felt something in her chest give way completely. "All right," she said quietly. "All right. Let's go." They arrived at the Signal 2 hours before the ceremony, slipping through a service entrance behind a flower delivery van, Liam charming a teenage porter into believing they were the florist's assistants, Cora's eyes tracking every guard, every camera, every exit. They did not know that 11 floors above them, Yoon-jia stood in front of a mirror in her ivory gown, going over the guest list one final time with her assistant, and stopped cold on a name she hadn't cleared herself. "Han Mi-suk added a guest," her assistant said. "Last-minute request. A guardian and 4 children." She said they're friends of the family. Jia's reflection didn't move for a long moment. "Cancel it," she said. "She already confirmed it with the wedding planner directly, ma'am. It's done." Jia turned from the mirror, ivory silk pooling at her feet, and for the first time in 9 years of careful, patient lying, something in her composed, practiced face cracked straight down the middle. "Then we handle it a different way," she said. Downstairs, the string quartet was tuning. Guests were arriving in waves of silk and diamonds. And 4 children who had crossed an ocean, lied to a sick mother, and uncovered a decade-long betrayal stood pressed against the service corridor wall, waiting for the one moment the doors would open wide enough to walk straight into the middle of a lie 9 years in the making. The service corridor smelled like candle wax and crushed orchids, and Cora pressed her back against the wall the way she'd seen people do in the spy movies Finn liked to watch, though nobody here was chasing them yet. "Not yet." 2 guards by the main doors," Liam whispered, having wandered close enough to count without looking like he was counting. "But there's a side entrance near the kitchen staff exit. Nobody's watching it. They're all watching the front because that's where the important guests come in." "We're not important guests," Maya said quietly. "No," Cora agreed. "We're better. We're a surprise." Odette knelt in front of them one last time, straightening Maya's collar with hands that hadn't stopped shaking since they left the guest house. "Once we're in there, there's no taking it back. You understand that? Whatever happens next, happens in front of 300 strangers." "We know," Finn said, patting the folder tucked inside his jacket, the printed proof folded twice to fit. "That's the point. You can't ignore 300 witnesses. If we go to him quietly, somewhere private, Jia makes us disappear before anyone even knows we existed. In front of everyone he has to look. He has to listen." It was, Odette thought, a 9-year-old's plan built with an adult's understanding of power, and that combination frightened her more than anything else had all week. They slipped through the kitchen exit 20 minutes before the ceremony was set to begin, past trays of champagne flutes and a harried sous chef who assumed they belonged to some vendor's family and waved them through without a second glance. The ballroom opened up in front of them like something out of a dream Maya might have had once and never told anyone about. Chandeliers dripping gold light, white orchids climbing every column, 300 guests arranged in soft murmuring clusters, and at the very center of it all, an arch dripping with more flowers than Maya had ever seen in one place. And beneath that arch, straightening his cufflinks with the distracted precision of a man who had learned long ago how to look composed regardless of what was happening underneath, stood their father. Finn saw him first and went very still, the way he did when a fact was too large to process immediately. Liam grabbed Cora's sleeve without meaning to. Maya's breath caught somewhere high in her chest. He looked exactly like the photograph. Older, sharper around the jaw, but it was him. The same face that had been staring up at them from a hollowed-out jewelry box in a Newark closet for weeks, except here he was in full color, breathing real, adjusting his tie beside a woman in ivory who was smiling at a photographer like she had never once had an unrehearsed moment in her life. "That's her," Cora murmured. "That's Jia." Up close, even from across a ballroom, something about the woman's smile didn't sit right. Too even, too practiced, the smile of someone reciting lines she had memorized so long ago she'd forgotten they were lines at all. Mi-suk spotted them from her seat in the second row and her whole body went rigid. She rose halfway out of her chair, one hand pressed to her mouth, before catching herself and sitting back down, eyes darting between the children by the kitchen door and her son at the altar, doing silent arithmetic that no longer needed solving. Now or
For
never,
small figures
Cora
moving
whispered.
through a crowd of
They
adults
crossed
who
the
parted
ballroom
for them
floor
the
the
way
together. Crowds part for anything unexpected and slightly wrong. The string quartet faltering mid-note as one musician noticed them first and nudged another. Finn went in low and fast. Liam followed with the folder pressed to his chest. Cora walked like she owned the marble beneath her feet. Maya came last, breathing too quickly, but she came. A photographer lowered his camera. The quartet stumbled into silence. An Hyun-woo turned from his bride-to-be and found 4 pairs of eyes staring up at him that were unmistakably, unbearably, his own. "Are you Do Hyun-woo?" Liam asked, his rehearsed English cracking in the middle. He didn't answer. He couldn't. One hand found the edge of the arch behind him like he needed something solid to hold on to, and for one suspended second, the entire ballroom seemed to be holding its breath along with him. Cora stepped forward and set the folder down beside the 4-tier cake, gold leaf catching the chandelier light. "We have proof," she said. Near the back of the room, Yoon-jia went very still, and then, with the smooth efficiency of a woman who had spent 9 years preparing for a disaster she'd hoped would never come, she began moving toward the front, already reaching for her phone. "What is this?" Hyun-woo said, quiet, careful, the voice of a man trying to keep 100 emotions from showing on his face at once. "Who sent you?" "Nobody sent us," Cora said. "We sent ourselves. Our mother didn't." "Your mother." He said the word like it cost him something. "Solene Marsh," Finn said, and watched the name land on his father's face like a stone dropped into still water. First the ripple of recognition, then something underneath it, older, rawer, grief that had clearly never fully healed, just been folded up small enough to carry. "That's not possible," Hyun-woo said, but his voice had lost all its careful control now. "Solene died 9 years ago. I was told." He stopped. His eyes moved from Finn to Liam to Cora to Maya, cataloging each face the way a person catalogs a photograph they've stared at for years, finding in real time the parts of themselves reflected back. "She died." "She didn't," Maya said softly, and something about her small, certain voice cut through the enormous room more than anything the others had said. "She's just sick. And really, really sad. And she's been sad for 9 years because everyone lied to her too." The folder sat open now on the white tablecloth, and Mi-suk had risen fully from her seat and was walking toward them, tears already tracking down her face, uncaring of who saw. Guests had begun murmuring in overlapping waves, phones rising slowly from pockets and purses despite a wedding planner somewhere frantically waving for no photography. "Please, not now." Hyun-woo reached for the folder with a hand that wasn't entirely steady and found, on top of 9 years of buried paperwork, a birth certificate with 4 names on it, and beneath that, a photograph, the same photograph from the jewelry box, except this copy had something written on the back in handwriting he recognized instantly, painfully, as his own. A note he'd left for Solene the last morning he'd seen her, promising to come find her the moment his father's board meetings ended. A promise he had never gotten the chance to keep because by the time he'd looked for her, she was already gone, and everyone around him had confirmed over and over that she died in a car accident back in the States. "Who told you she was dead?" Cora said, and it wasn't really a question. It was an accusation, aimed with the precision of a girl who had spent 41 nights building a case in a library computer lab 3,000 miles away. Hyun-woo's eyes lifted, slowly, from the folder to the crowd behind him, to the woman in ivory who had stopped walking 6 feet away, phone still clutched in one hand, her carefully composed face finally, for the first time in 9 years, showing something true. "Jia," he said, and her name came out of him like the last piece of a puzzle sliding into place, ugly and undeniable. "You told me she died." Every camera in that ballroom turned toward her at once. Jia didn't move for a long moment. In a room full of 300 people, she had the particular stillness of someone doing rapid math on how much of the truth could still be salvaged. "Hyun-woo," she said carefully, her voice pitched for calm, "for reason, the voice she used in boardrooms when a deal was collapsing and only she seemed to notice. This is clearly some kind of scheme. Children showing up at a wedding with a folder of papers. You can't possibly take this seriously in front of everyone. Then explain the note, he said. His hand hadn't stopped shaking since he'd read his own handwriting on the back of that photograph. Explain how 4 children who look exactly like me ended up holding a promise I wrote to a woman you told me was dead. People forge documents, Jia said too quickly. Forge my handwriting from 9 years ago, Hyunwoo said. Forge a hospital visitor's memory of my mother's face when she found out. Forge 4 birth dates that line up exactly 9 months after the last time I saw Solene. His voice had gone very quiet, the kind of quiet that was more dangerous than shouting. Explain the severance authorization with your signature on it, Jia. Dated the same week she disappeared. Somewhere behind them, a gasp rippled through the front rows, quiet at first, then less quiet. Mi-suk had reached the children by now, kneeling despite her ivory-trimmed hanbok, gathering all 4 of them against her at once like she'd been waiting 9 years to do exactly that and hadn't realized it until this second. My grandbabies, she whispered, and the words cracked apart in her throat. My goodness. Look at you. Look at all of you. Cora, who had held herself together through an ocean crossing and a hospital ward and a service corridor break-in, finally let herself cry, silent and furious, into the shoulder of a grandmother she'd known for less than 2 weeks. Jia's composure, so carefully built over 9 years, was cracking in real time in front of every camera in the room, and she seemed to realize it the same instant everyone else did. I did what I did to protect you, she said to Hyunwoo, and her voice shifted, not toward apology but toward something colder, more desperate. Your father was dying. The board was circling. You needed a wife who understood this world, not some American girl who worked in the hospitality division and would have been eaten alive by your family's expectations. I saved you from a mistake. You didn't save me from anything, Hyunwoo said. You stole 9 years from me. You let me believe the woman I loved was dead. You let my children grow up thinking their father abandoned them. His voice broke on the last word and he didn't try to hide it, not anymore, not in front of anyone. Do you understand what you took? I understand exactly what I did, Jia said, and something in her face went flat, resigned, the mask finally dropping all the way. I did it because I loved you first. Before Solene. Before any of this. I was your friend since we were children, and I watched you fall for a stranger in 6 months what you never once looked at me in 20 years. Her voice cracked, ugly and honest for the first time. So yes, I made calls. I signed papers. I told a frightened, humiliated woman that leaving quietly with money was the only dignity she had left, and I told you she died so you'd never go looking. I would do it again. The ballroom had gone utterly silent, 300 guests frozen mid-breath, phones raised and recording every word. Hyunwoo looked at her for a long moment and Finn, watching everything with the careful attention he gave to facts that mattered, saw something shift in his father's face, grief finally making room for something sharper. Get her out of my sight, Hyunwoo said not to Jia, but to the 2 security guards who had finally, belatedly, made their way to the front of the room. And call my lawyers. Every document with her signature on it is being reviewed by morning. Hyunwoo, Jia reached for his arm. Don't, he said, stepping back, and the single word carried 9 years of a grief she had manufactured for her own benefit. You don't get to touch anything of mine ever again. Security moved in, and the ballroom erupted into overlapping whispers as Jia was walked, ivory train dragging behind her across marble, toward the same service corridor the children had used to sneak in 20 minutes earlier, a small, bitter symmetry that Cora noticed even through her tears. Hyunwoo turned back to his children, dropping to one knee in front of them, still in his wedding suit, still surrounded by flowers meant for a marriage that would never happen now. Tell me about her, he said, voice raw. Tell me about your mother. Is she really? She's alive, Maya said softly. But she's sick and she's really tired and she doesn't know we're here and she thinks we're on a school trip to Jeju. Hyunwoo let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and pulled all 4 of them into his arms at once, clumsy and desperate, like a man trying to make up for 9 years in a single embrace. Take me to her, he said. Tonight. No. However far it is, I don't care. New Jersey, Liam said, muffled against his father's shoulder. It's really far. I have a plane, Hyunwoo said, and for the first time since they'd arrived, something like a laugh moved through all four children at once. But as they pulled apart, Cora's eyes caught Misuk's over her father's shoulder, and something in her grandmother's expression, worried, watchful, still scanning the retreating crowd of guests, told her the night wasn't finished yet. Because near the ballroom's east exit, half hidden behind a pillar of white orchids, a man in a dark suit who did not belong to the catering staff or the guest list was speaking urgently into a phone, and the moment he caught Cora watching him, he turned and slipped out into the night. Cora didn't say anything about the man by the pillar, not yet. She filed it away the way she filed away everything, quietly, precisely for later, because right now there wasn't room in her chest for anything except her father's arms around her and the impossible fact that they'd actually done it. The plane was smaller than Liam expected and somehow more comfortable than any bed at the guest house, all soft leather and low lighting, and Hyunwoo sat across from his children the entire 14 hours without sleeping once, as if he was afraid that closing his eyes might make the last 2 hours turn out to have been a dream. Tell me everything, he said somewhere over the Pacific. All of it. I missed 9 years. I want them back, even secondhand. So they told him. Finn explained, with scientific precision, the exact chemical process his mother used to make her famous burnt but somehow perfect pancakes. Liam told him about the time Soline had walked 2 miles in the snow because their old car broke down and she'd refused to let a single one of them miss a school recital. Cora, more carefully, told him about the nights their mother thought they were asleep, the ones where the walls were thin enough to hear crying that never made it into daylight. Maya just held his hand and said, "She talks about you sometimes. Not by name. Just someone. Like a shape she doesn't want to look it straight on." Hyunwoo closed his eyes at that one, finally, just for a moment. Misuk had insisted on coming too, seated beside her son with a blanket over her knees and 4 grandchildren's names already memorized in order of age, muttering under her breath in Korean about the years she'd lost and the years she intended to make up for, starting immediately. They landed in Newark a little after 6 in the evening, and the drive to the apartment felt, to all 4 children, both impossibly long and far too short. Soline was in the kitchen when they walked in, thinner than she'd been 3 weeks ago, moving slowly, a mug of tea going cold on the counter because she'd forgotten it was there. She turned at the sound of the door, already halfway through a sentence about how the Jeju trip had run late, and the words died somewhere in her throat. He was standing in her doorway. 9 years older, grayer at the temples, dressed like a man who'd left his own wedding without changing out of the suit, and behind him, unmistakably, their 4 children, home and whole and crying. "You're supposed to be dead," Soline whispered, which was, of everything she might have said in that moment, the truest thing. "I was told the same about you," Hyunwoo said, and crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, and whatever he'd meant to say next disappeared entirely once he was close enough to see, up close, that she was real. He didn't touch her right away. He just looked, the way Finn looked at a fact he'd waited years to confirm, cataloging every change 9 years had made, every line of exhaustion he hadn't been there to ease. "I mourned you," he said. "For years. I built an entire life around a grief that was never true, and the whole time you were here, sick, alone, raising 4 children who I didn't even know existed, and someone let that happen on purpose." Soline's legs gave out slightly, and he caught her before she reached the floor, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all, because 9 years doesn't undo itself with words, it undoes itself slowly, the way frost melts off a window 1 degree at a time. "Jia," Soline finally said, not a question. "Jia," he confirmed, and something furious moved across his face. "It's being handled. Every document, every phone record, every payment she authorized to keep you silent and keep me lied to, my legal team has it all by now. She won't walk away from this untouched." He kept that promise. Within 2 months, Do-One Group's board, already uneasy about a public engagement collapse broadcast on every entertainment channel in the country, moved to formally sever ties with Jia's law firm, and the internal audit Hyunwoo ordered surfaced enough evidence of falsified records and unauthorized use of company funds that criminal charges followed not long after. She did not go to prison for love. She went for fraud, for forgery, for 9 years of carefully documented deception that, once exposed, could no longer be waved away as heartbreak. The woman who had spent a decade rehearsing the perfect smile now rehearsed something else entirely, in a courtroom, in front of cameras that showed no mercy at all. Soline's treatment began within the week, funded quietly and completely, though she made Hyunwoo promise more than once that he wasn't buying her back. He was simply, finally, allowed to take care of his family. The specialist called her case complicated but treatable, caught in time, and for the first time in months, Soline slept through an entire night without waking at 2 in the morning to check on children who were, for once, actually asleep down the hall. The man by the pillar turned out to be exactly what Cora had feared. A private investigator Jia had hired the moment she suspected the children existed, tasked with finding out how much they knew before the wedding, and if necessary making the problem disappear quietly. He was arrested within the month. Once Hyunwoo's legal team traced the payments back to their source, one more thread in a decade of quiet cruelty finally pulled all the way loose. Mi-suk moved half her wardrobe into a guest room in New Jersey before anyone officially invited her to, unofficially adopting the entire block by way of homemade banchan left on every neighbor's doorstep, and nobody had the heart to tell her she wasn't, strictly speaking, a resident. By the time autumn came around again, the family had settled into something that looked, from the outside, almost ordinary: school pickups, homework at the kitchen table, a father learning slowly how to braid hair badly and laugh about it, a grandmother teaching 4 grandchildren how to fold dumplings the proper way. Finn kept his folder of evidence in a drawer, not because he needed it anymore, but because Cora said some things were worth keeping just to remember how far they'd come. Liam made friends with every single person in their new Seoul apartment building within a week of the family's decision to split their time between 2 homes. Cora finally let herself cry in front of people who weren't a grandmother she'd known for 2 weeks. And Maya, still the first to feel anything, was also the first to notice that her mother's laugh had come back, quieter than the neighbor downstairs remembered, but real and getting louder every week. Soline stood at her kitchen window one evening in October, watching her children fold paper cranes on the living room floor with their father and grandmother, for heads bent together over a project none of them were particularly good at, and felt something in her chest loosen that had been clenched tight for 9 long years. She had been sick and silenced and lied to. But she had also raised 4 children brave enough to lie about a school trip, cross an ocean, and crash a wedding to bring their family back together. And whatever else those 9 years had cost her, they had never once cost her that. Some families are built quietly, over decades, without anyone noticing the work it takes. Others are stolen apart and then, against every odds stacked in the thief's favor, stitched back together by 4 9-year-olds who simply refused to accept the lie they'd been handed. This one was the second kind. And it was finally whole.